Hello, today I'll be sharing how I create a podcast. The logo you're seeing is from the Life Podcast Network that you can find at lifepodcast.net. On June 28th, 2020, I was fortunate to interview Kelly and Yvonne, and this is what you're seeing here is a segment of the live stream that you can catch at YouTube. Just go to the live place, look back on June 28th, and there you will find when I interviewed Kelly and Yvonne for the better part of an hour, and the goal was to capture enough audio so that I could in turn turn it into a podcast. Why podcasts? Well, first, what is a podcast? It's like a recorded radio show, an audio show that you can listen to on your computer or smartphone. I personally like to listen to them while I'm driving or maybe working in the garage. Since a podcast is just audio, it requires some imagination, which is a good thing, I think. It's somewhere between reading a book and watching a TV show. Some of the podcasts I have enjoyed are This American Life, WDW Radio, and VORW, which is Voice of Report of the Week. I personally see podcasts in one of two categories. The first one is informative/interview. This is where people really just have a charismatic personality. They're able to carry the show without doing a lot of work beyond just recording it and putting it out there. The second one is story-like or narrative. I personally like the latter, but in this video I'll be taking an interview and making it more story-like through narration and editing. Maybe in a future episode I will share how I got inspired to follow this format. This is a list of the minimum of things you need to create a podcast. A recording device, recording software, editing software, audio storage, and a podcast service. So, recording device. For most people, this is their computer. So obviously your computer needs a microphone. And even though your computer probably has a built-in microphone, I would recommend buying a separate quality microphone or maybe even a headphone with a microphone. Usually just plugs in with a USB connection. A portable recording device is needed if you're out and about and want to capture audio for your show away from home. I have the Roland R5, which is a bit dated, but it's been amazingly reliable. Number 2, recording software. Your PC or Mac should have that, should you only be recording your own voice. If you plan to interview people or have collaborations, you'll want to use a recording software for your conversation. Some free options include Skype and YouTube. Editing software. A lot of podcasters use GarageBand if they are on a Mac. If you're on a PC, there is free software such as Audacity. Personally, I use Mixcraft. I paid for it once a long time ago, and I find it very reliable and easy to use. Audio storage. Once you have created your podcast, you need to put the audio file on a place available on the internet. You can pay for a service like Libsyn, or use free services like Podbean, or even at your own website if you have one. Podcast service. I struggled to come up with a good name for this, but these are basically the places like iTunes, Stitcher, etc. that host podcasts. That's how people find your podcasts. You can put it at your website, but how many people are going to find it there? So make your podcast available at a podcasting service like iTunes or Stitcher. They're all free but require a little work in the beginning. There's a number of other things you could include here, such as access to audio bites to enhance your podcast, or your social network accounts that you want to use to promote your podcast. Creating a story. I mentioned earlier that I see two major styles of podcasts. An informative podcast usually has somebody very knowledgeable about a certain topic, and they give you interesting information around that topic. The format I prefer to go after is often referred to as narrative, which gives the listener something of a story. To me, this format has always been more interesting, although it's a lot more work. Kelly and Yvonne are the couple behind the YouTube channel Meyers and the Mouse. I've gotten to know them over the past couple of years as we are both part of a Disney community of live streamers and vloggers. The more I got to know them, the more impressed I was. But I also felt like they had a story to tell, and they surely do, as I discovered when I interviewed them on June 28th. Now, I could have just spent an hour or even less adding an opening and closing to the audio and slapped it out there for you to listen to. I'm sure you would have enjoyed it. But in the narrative format that I've grown to love and use, I find it much more interesting to take that interview apart and tell a story that uses some tricks of the trade to draw folks into the story and make it more interesting. Here's what I try to accomplish in that format. Number 1, set the hook. Create intrigue right away. Number 2, inviting intro piece. Number 3, introduction. Number 4, get to know the people. Number 5, tell their story. Number 6, answer the hook. Number 7, bonus surprise. And number 8, end with hook for next show. When I planned to interview Kelly and Yvonne, I didn't know what I'd get. Quite honestly, and not to put too much pressure on you, but the interviewer controls where the interview goes. You have to be interested in the people you are interviewing, and it's completely about them. So you can't spend too much time with, oh yeah, that reminds me of when I yada yada. It's okay to do some of that if it helps make the interview more pleasant, but that should all come out of the podcast. So I think it's important to really listen to what the people you are interviewing are trying to tell you and see if you can dig a bit deep into those conversations. Transparency. This is absolutely key to an interesting interview. Transparency means not hiding the bad stuff, the challenges that are part of their story. The more vulnerable people are, the more interested the listener will be. When Kelly and Yvonne started to share about their challenges they encountered trying to get married, I knew right then that was the hook of the story. Sometimes you have to go back and listen to the whole interview to find that hook, but in this case it was very obvious. It intrigued me when I heard it, and so I knew that would intrigue others. So the next thing I do is find in the interview the portion that leaves an unanswered question. It's a moment of uncertainty that the listener will say, what happened? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't like to think of this as a trick, but rather as a good storytelling method because I know the story is worth listening to. It's the same kind of hook any fictional book puts on the back. The introduction that leaves you wondering what's going to happen. Next, I'm going to show how I create a hook for a podcast. Now, this isn't the one that I'm going to use in the actual final podcast. That one's called This Happy Place, and it has a unique message in the beginning. But this will give you an idea of how to create an interesting hook.
Yeah. So then, the day of the wedding, the morning of the wedding, everybody's getting around. We're loading up the car. Shane pulls up in front of my house, and he goes, "You don't have to do this. Get in my car. Come on.
Oh,
You don't have to do this." I'm like, "No, dude, I can't." And he goes, "No, come on. I know you still love me. Get in my car." I'm like, "I can't. I'm sorry. I can't." And so he drove off. So
Next, I want you to listen to the intro piece I pull out of that segment.
the morning of the wedding, everybody's getting around. We're loading up the car. Shane pulls up in front of my house, and he goes, "You don't have to do this. Get in my car. Come on. You don't have to do this." I'm like, "No, dude, I can't." And he goes, "No, come on. I know you still love me. Get in my car."
Next, I will add some music for effect. What you see here is the project with 2 audio pieces, and notice on the bottom audio, which is the music part, I can change the volume at different places for effect.
The morning of the wedding, everybody's getting around, we're loading up the car. Shane pulls up in front of my house and he goes, "You don't have to do this. Get in my car. Come on. You don't have to do this." I'm like, "No, dude, I can't." And he goes, "No, come on. I know you still love me. Get in my car."
Once I have that beginning piece nailed down, I find it much easier to finish the podcast because at that point I'm actually excited to tell the story. So from here, just again note the elements that I put in the podcast. I'm not going to go over them in this episode, but have a listen to the podcast. Again, I use a different intro piece there. You'll see that podcast requires a certain kind of intro hook. So you can find it at lifepodcast.net on the main page, and you can also search for the most recent episode of This Happy Place on Google. You'll find it at iTunes and a number of other platforms. The name of the episode is Meyers and the Mouse. I hope to do more of these kind of videos in the future, but until then, here are some podcasts, actually all the podcasts that I have worked on in the past, and the links to them are in the description.